The letter he was never supposed to read. A story by your English story channel. Though the envelope was already yellowing at the edges, when Jackson Reed found it tucked behind the loose panel in his grandfather's oak desk, the one that smelled of pipe tobacco and secrets. It was addressed to him in handwriting he didn't recognize. The ink faded to the color of dried blood, and across the seal, in his grandfather's unmistakable scrawl, were 4 words that made his heart stop. Burn this, do not read. Jackson should have burned it. Every instinct in his 32-year-old body, honed by a decade as a homicide detective in Chicago, screamed at him to toss it into the fireplace and walk away. But Jackson Reed had never been good at walking away from things. That was why his ex-wife had the house in Lincoln Park. That was why his captain had him on mandatory leave. And that was why, at 2:47 a.m. on a Tuesday in March, with the wind howling off Lake Michigan like a wounded animal, Jackson slit the seal with his pocket knife and pulled out 3 pages of cream-colored paper that would unravel everything he thought he knew about love, betrayal, and the man who raised him. Though, my dearest Jackson, if you are reading this, then I am dead, and you have disobeyed me for the very last time. I cannot say I am surprised. You were always too curious for your own good, too much like your mother in that way. But I hope, for both our sakes, that you read these words with an open heart, because what I am about to tell you will change the shape of your world. I am not your grandfather. Jackson read the sentence 3 times. The words didn't rearrange themselves into something sensible. The paper didn't dissolve into ash. He was not, apparently, having some kind of stress-induced hallucination brought on by too much bourbon and not enough sleep. He was sitting in his grandfather's study in the old Victorian on Elm Street in Oak Park, Illinois, holding a letter that claimed the man who had taught him to throw a baseball, who had bailed him out of jail when he was 19 and stupid, who had sat beside his hospital bed for 3 days after the shooting on the South Side, was not his grandfather at all. I am your father. The room tilted. Jackson gripped the arms of the leather chair, the same chair where Arthur Reed, Arthur, not Grandpa, never Grandpa again, had sat every evening for 40 years, reading the Tribune and pretending not to worry about the boy he'd raised as his own grandson. Your mother, Eleanor, was not my daughter. She was my wife. Though Jackson had been 7 years old when his mother died, he remembered the funeral in vague watercolor impressions, the black dress his Aunt Patricia had forced him into, the way the priest's voice had echoed in the cavernous church in downtown Chicago, the smell of lilies that made him want to vomit. He remembered Arthur's hand, rough and warm, holding his so tight it hurt. He remembered thinking, even then, that the old man's grief was too large, too consuming, to be merely that of a father mourning his child. Now he understood. Eleanor and I met in 1968 at a jazz club on the South Side. She was 22, a singer with a voice like smoke and honey, and I was 47, a widower with 2 grown children who thought their father had lost his mind. Maybe I had. Love doesn't consult with reason, Jackson. It arrives like a storm, and you either shelter from it, or you let it carry you away. We married in secret in Gary, Indiana, 3 months later. Your aunt and uncle never forgave me. They called her a gold digger, a manipulator, a woman young enough to be my granddaughter. They didn't see what I saw, a woman with a sadness in her eyes that matched my own, a woman who understood that the heart doesn't check IDs before it opens itself to another soul. When she became pregnant with you, we made a decision. The world would not understand. Our love would be twisted into something ugly, and you would grow up bearing the weight of other people's judgments. So we became what they expected, an old man and his pregnant daughter, returning to the family home to raise the child together. Your aunt and uncle were told that Eleanor had married a man who abandoned her, that she had come home in shame. The lie was easier than the truth. Lies usually are, but lies have a way of calcifying, of becoming prisons. By the time you were born, I was Grandpa in the eyes of the world, and Grandpa I remained. Your mother and I loved each other in stolen moments. In the kitchen at midnight, in the garden when you were napping, in the quiet language of glances across the dinner table. We told ourselves it was enough. We told ourselves we were protecting you. We were protecting ourselves. Jackson set the letter down. His hands were shaking. Outside, a siren wailed in the distance. the sound bleeding into the night like a memory. He thought of the photograph on the mantelpiece, his mother in a sundress standing in the garden, Arthur beside her with his hand on her shoulder. He had always thought it was a father's pride in the frame. Now he saw the way Arthur's thumb brushed her collarbone. Now he saw the way she leaned into him, not away. Your mother died in a car accident on the Eisenhower Expressway, coming home from a gig in the city. She was 26 years old. You were 4. I wanted to die with her. I would have if not for you. You became my reason to keep breathing, Jackson. But you were also my daily reminder of what I had lost, of the life we could have lived if we had been braver. I raised you as my grandson because I didn't know how to be anything else. The lie had become my skin, and I watched you grow into a man who valued truth above all things, a detective for God's sake. And I knew that one day you would find this letter, or find some other crack in the story I had built, and you would hate me for the deception. I hope you don't. I hope you understand that love, real love, is the most terrifying force in the universe. It makes cowards of us all. It makes us hide behind titles and conventions and the fear of what the neighbors might say. Your mother and I loved each other until her last breath, and I have loved her every day since. That is the only truth that matters. Jackson wiped his face with the back of his hand. He hadn't realized he was crying. The letter was smudged where his tears had fallen, and he thought, absurdly, that Arthur would have been furious about the water damage. There is one more thing you need to know, and this is the part that will test the limits of your capacity for forgiveness. The night your mother died, she was not alone in the car. Jackson's breath caught. His detective instincts, dulled by grief and bourbon, snapped to attention. She was with a man, a musician from the club, young and handsome and everything I was not. She was leaving me, Jackson. She had finally reached the limit of what she could sacrifice for our secret, and she had chosen him, and a life in the open, over me and the shadows we had built together. I knew. I had followed her that night. I watched them leave the club together, laughing, her hand in his. I watched them drive away, and I did something I have never confessed to another living soul. I called in an anonymous tip to the highway patrol. I reported a drunk driver on the Eisenhower. I gave them her license plate number. The patrol car pursued her. She panicked. She had a little marijuana in the car. Nothing serious, but she was terrified of scandal, of the headlines of losing you. She drove faster. She lost control on the curve near Harlem Avenue. The musician survived. She did not. I killed her, Jackson. Not with my hands, but with my jealousy and my fear, and my inability to let her go. I have carried that weight for 28 years. It has been the truest companion of my life, heavier than any love, any joy, any pride I took in watching you become the man you are. I do not ask for your forgiveness. I do not deserve it. I ask only that you understand the terrible arithmetic of the human heart, that love and possession are so easily confused, that the desire to keep someone can become the very thing that destroys them. Thus, the letter fell from Jackson's fingers. He stood up too fast, and the room spun. He stumbled to the window and pressed his forehead against the cold glass, staring out at the empty street where Arthur had taught him to ride a bicycle, where Eleanor had pushed him on a swing that was no longer there. The swing set had been removed decades ago, but Jackson could still hear the chains creaking in the wind. He thought of his own marriage, collapsed under the weight of his silence, his inability to let Claire in. He thought of the way he had followed her once, late at night, convinced she was having an affair, only to find her at an all-night diner, crying over a book of poetry her mother had given her before she died. He thought of how close he had come to destroying something beautiful, because he couldn't bear the thought of not possessing it completely. He thought of Arthur, alone in this house for 20 years after Eleanor's death, surrounded by photographs of a family that was never quite what it appeared to be. He thought of the old man sitting in this very chair, writing these words, knowing they would be read only after he was beyond judgment or redemption. Jackson picked up the letter. There was one page left. I have left you the house such as it is. The money is in the trust we established years ago. You'll find the documents in the safe behind the portrait of your mother. There is also a key to a safety deposit box at the First National Bank on Lake Street. Inside, you will find the marriage certificate Eleanor and I never showed anyone, and a letter she wrote to you on the night she died. She never got the chance to give it to you. I kept it, Another theft, I know, but I couldn't bear the thought of her words existing in the world without me. I have loved you as a father, Jackson, even when I could only call myself your grandfather. I have tried to give you the honesty I never had the courage to claim for myself. I have failed in 1,000 small ways, but never in the ways that mattered most. You were the best thing I ever did. You were the only good thing to come out of my cowardice. Burn this letter. Let me take my secrets to the grave. But if you are reading it, then you have chosen truth over comfort, as I always knew you would. I hope it sets you free. I hope it teaches you that love is not about possession, but about the courage to let someone be fully, completely themselves, even if that means letting them go. I am sorry for everything, for nothing, for loving too much and too badly and too long. Your father, Arthur. Jackson sat in the dark for a long time, the letter clutched in his hand like a lifeline or an anchor. He couldn't decide which. The wind had died down. Somewhere in the house, a floorboard creaked, the old Victorian settling, or perhaps Arthur's ghost, finally at rest. At dawn, he walked to the bank on Lake Street. The safety deposit box contained exactly what Arthur had promised. A marriage certificate dated 1968, and a single sheet of paper in his mother's handwriting, the ink still sharp and blue. My sweet Jackson, by the time you read this, I will be gone, and you will be a man, and I will have missed so much of your life that it breaks my heart to imagine it. But I want you to know that you were conceived in love, not the easy kind, but the kind that persists through shame and secrecy and the judgment of the world. You were wanted, you were cherished, you were the reason I stayed as long as I did, and the reason I am finally finding the courage to leave. Your father is a good man who made a bad choice out of love. Do not hate him for it. We are all doing the best we can with the hearts we have been given. Love bravely, my son. Love openly. Do not hide your heart behind walls of your own making. That is the only wisdom I have to offer, and I offer it with my whole soul. I will watch over you always. Mom. Jackson stood on the steps of the bank as the sun rose over Chicago, the city of his birth, the city of his secrets, the city where love had destroyed and rebuilt him in the span of a single night. He folded both letters into his coat pocket and walked toward the lake where the water was turning gold with morning light. He didn't know what he would do with the house. He didn't know if he would tell his aunt and uncle the truth or let them carry their version of history to their graves. He didn't know if he would ever stop being angry or if the anger would eventually dissolve into something like understanding. But he knew this. He would call Claire. He would tell her everything. He would ask her to coffee or dinner or whatever she would give him, and he would try, for the first time in his life, to love without possession, to hold without grasping, to be brave enough to let someone choose him every single day. He took out his phone. The screen was cracked. He'd dropped it last week, drunk and despairing, in the alley behind the precinct. He ran his thumb over the spider web of fractures and smiled for the first time in months. "Hey," he said when she answered, her voice thick with sleep. "It's me. I know it's early. I know I don't deserve." Jackson. She was awake now. He could hear her sitting up, could picture her in the apartment in Wicker Park, the one with the fire escape where they'd sat on summer nights, planning a future he had been too afraid to claim. "What's wrong?" "Nothing," he said, and meant it. "Everything. I found something, a letter, actually 2 letters, and I think I need to tell you about them, if you're willing to listen." There was a pause, long enough for his heart to climb into his throat. Then, "There's a diner on Milwaukee Avenue, the one with the blue neon. I'll meet you there in an hour." "I'll be there," he said. "Claire?" "Yeah." "Thank you for answering, for still answering." "Just don't be late," she said, and he could hear the smile in her voice, cautious but real, a door opening just wide enough to let in the light. Jackson Reed walked east toward the lake, the letters safe in his pocket, the ghosts of his parents walking beside him in the morning mist. He was not his grandfather's grandson. He was his father's son. He was his mother's bravest hope. And he was, at last, ready to stop hiding behind the stories other people had written for him. The city woke up around him, trucks rumbling down Grand Avenue, coffee shops unlocking their doors, the L train rattling overhead like a promise. Somewhere in the distance, a saxophone played a song that might have been jazz or blues or just the sound of a heart finally learning to sing. Closing note, dear friends and fellow story lovers, thank you for staying with Jackson until the end. Stories like this remind us that the truth, however painful, is always lighter than the secrets we carry, and that love, real love, is the courage to be seen exactly as we are. If this story moved you, if it made you think of someone you need to call, or a truth you've been hiding, or simply the beauty of a Chicago sunrise, then you are exactly where you belong. Good luck in all your own stories, the ones you're living and the ones you're still writing. May they be filled with suspense, with romance, with meaning, and with the kind of endings that feel like beginnings. Be sure to stay on this channel for more stories that dig deep into the human heart, that keep you up past midnight, that remind you why we tell tales in the first place. And if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button, because the next story is already waiting. And trust me, you won't want to miss it. Until then, keep watching, keep feeling, keep being brave. Your English Story Channel.